Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really tense global situation. It's a crisis that's genuinely threatening continental stability, and it's putting five specific leaders right under the microscope. Our mission, really, is to tackle that burning question. When the pressure really builds, who's going to be the first to blink?
It is a very high-stakes scenario, and what really kicks things off for this deep dive is this sudden, pretty sharp escalation along the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. And we're not talking about just one thing here. It's a volatile mix, really.
Right.
You've got these deep-seated territorial arguments, crucial energy interests all colliding, and some serious military posturing going on. Think of it like, well, a powder keg, almost ready to go off.
A powder keg is right. And what makes this whole thing so fascinating is how the stakes are just so different for every leader involved here. We're looking at five, distinct types of leaders drawn from completely different political worlds, and every single one is facing their own unique set of pressures.
Exactly. So our focus is on these five archetypes, right? Each one caught in this pressure cooker. You've got, for example, a democratically elected leader who's really struggled with a bad economic downturn. Then there's an authoritarian president dealing with simmering unrest at home, even if they look strong on the outside. And a reformist leader who's operating under some pretty intense international scrutiny.
And that's not all of them. We've also got a populist firebrand. You know the type. Power built on that direct connection with the people. But now their alliances are looking shaky. And finally, number five is a strategic technocrat. This is someone whose power comes more from rational management, expertise, maybe economics or logistics, and they're trying to navigate some really tricky external dependencies. So this deep dive is all about revealing those specific pressures on each one and, crucially, what it might actually take for one of them to, well, blink. Then what?
So let's really unpack this. Let's start getting into these leader profiles, the specific pressures on them. First one up, the Democratic leader. They're dealing with huge economic strain. We're talking soaring inflation, big protests in the streets.
Yeah, and what's really key here is the tightrope that kind of leader has to walk. It's unique. They need to project strength internationally, right? But at the same time, they got to manage these massive pressures coming from their own public. The dilemma isn't just, do I make a concession? It's more about how quickly that perceived strength can flip into being a major weakness. See, unlike an autocrat, their actual power comes from public consent, and that can just vanish much faster than any military capability.
That's a really important difference. It makes you wonder, though, could that pressure, that need to answer to the people, maybe also make them surprisingly resilient sometimes? But okay, let's shift to the authoritarian president. The picture here is pretty stark. Civil liberties restricted, dissent crushed. But even with that tight grip, you're saying unrest is still bubbling under the surface.
And this leads to that classic authoritarian bind, doesn't it? What wins out? Pride or just basic stability. Any concession can look like weakness, which is poison to their absolute control. But letting internal unrest fester could eventually bring the whole system down. So the paradox is that their strength, which is built on crushing dissent, is actually their most fragile point. The real question here isn't if they'll blink, but will concessions only happen after you see those first irreversible signs of the system cracking.
Right.
Or maybe losing what we call elite cohesion. That's when their inner circle, the powerful people around them, starts to break apart.
Right when the foundation starts to crumble. Okay, and then we've got the reformist leader. They're under this intense global spotlight, international aid, reforms that depend on meeting certain conditions. It all hangs in the balance. That sounds incredibly precarious.
Oh, absolutely. And if you connect this to the wider crisis, a blink for this particular leader could mean losing all that international trust. That jeopardizes the aid they need, the very reforms they're pushing for. But flip side, the right concession, timed strategically, could actually bring renewed hope, maybe even solidify international support. The inherent weakness is that their leverage is external. They're managing global patience, global political will, not just their own population.
It's such a high-wire act. One wrong move and everything they've built could just unravel. Okay, next. The populist firebrand. Their situation's already a bit unstable, you said. Dealing with fragile coalitions, a really polarized opposition.
Yeah, what's interesting with the populists is that their whole brand, their political capital, it's built on this image of just unwavering, sometimes aggressive resolve. They sort of thrive on conflict, that us versus them thing. The danger for them, as we're seeing maybe, is that their already weak alliances might just abandon them if they look like they're faltering when things get hot. The paradox is their strength seems to come from popular support, but that support can be incredibly fickle. The second they show a crack, That base which demands total strength might just disappear way faster than for a traditional political party.
It's like their power base is built on sand, almost, needs constant reinforcement. And finally, the strategic technocrat, the one managing these significant external dependencies. Their country relies heavily on a key trade partner for vital stuff.
This leader's problem is really different because their strength is supposed to be, rational management, efficiency, data. But that makes them highly vulnerable to shocks from the outside. They have to constantly weigh defending national interests against the huge leverage this key trade partner has over them. And that looming threat of trade embargoes, well, it isn't just an economic problem. For a technocrat whose whole system relies on things running smoothly, like supply chains, a break there could be the ultimate tipping point. It just exposes the limits of rational control when things get truly chaotic.
Right. So this really brings us to the core question of this whole deep dive, doesn't it? What actually breaks a leader? It's clearly not always about military force. Our sources seem to point to very different triggers for different types of leaders.
Yeah, and that raises a really important point about leadership under extreme stress. For a democratic leader, often it's losing that internal legitimacy that forces them to back down. When people stop believing in the leader, or the system's ability to fix basic problems like, say, runaway inflation, well, concessions stop being a choice. They become almost inevitable.
Which is so different from the authoritarian context, like you said. There, it's often about losing that elite support, that cohesion within the ruling group, or facing really harsh international sanctions that finally forces their hand. It's like internal power games and external pressure coming together.
Exactly. And the technocrats, like we discussed, they falter when those critical supply chains break down. Their whole management system just collapses.
Yeah.
Shows how vulnerable you are when you rely on external factors. Populists, though, they face that huge backlash when their public support just evaporates. Their base is their power.
Yeah.
Once that belief is gone, poof, their political capital dissolves.
And the reformists. Their biggest risk is simply when the world loses patience. The international community just moves on, focuses elsewhere, and that vital support line gets cut. You can really see how complex each situation is, how the breaking points are so different, and how what might save one leader could absolutely doom another one.
Absolutely. And the stakes in this specific crisis, these couldn't be higher. It's not just about whether these 5 leaders keep their jobs. We are talking about the stability of a whole continent, global energy markets, complex alliances, and maybe most importantly, people's actual lives and livelihoods. It's all hanging in the balance.
It's a really stark reminder, isn't it, that in these pressure cooker moments, someone eventually is going to blink. We've dug into the pressures, we've looked at the unique vulnerabilities for each leader type. The question now, maybe for you listening, is whose resolve crumbles first? And when? And what might that first concession end up costing, well, all of us?